Welcome back to the garage. It's time for another episode of Token Teardown. And if you're new here, this is the show where we jack crypto projects up on the lift, shine a light underneath, and explain what's actually happening under the hood. Because when a project says it's easy, we don't clap, we don't nod, we don't retweet the thread. We ask a better question. Easy for who? Easy like your grandma can use it without calling tech support, or easy like looks simple until you open the hood and realize half the engine is missing. And that matters today because the machine on the lift is XPR Network, formerly known as Proton. Now here's the important part. This episode is a viewer request. Someone in the garage said, "Hey, everyone keeps sleeping on XPR. Can you actually tear it down instead of just brushing past it?" XXX saw that comment, paused, read it again, and instead of shrugging it off, he said, "All right, let's take the challenge." That's how projects end up on this lift. Not because they're trending, not because they're pumping, but because someone thinks there's something real under the hood and wants it inspected properly. Now, before we go any further, let's get this out of the way. Yes, we're going to cover price. Yes, we're going to run scenarios. We know that's everyone's favorite part. But in this garage, we don't start with the speedometer because price is the output, not the engine. And if you don't understand what's being built, who it's built for, and why it exists, those numbers don't mean a thing. So today, we're not here to hype XPR. We're not here to dunk on it either. We're here to answer one honest question. Is XPR a properly engineered daily driver, the kind you can hand to normal people and trust on the highway? Or is it a concept car, looks clean, sounds good, but was never meant to survive real traffic? Because XPR makes some bold claims. Zero gas fees, human-readable names, optional identity, banking rails, compliance-friendly crypto. That's a lot of promises. So the real question is simple. Does this deserve a spot in your garage, or is this one better admired from across the street? And just so you know, XXX didn't skim a thread and call it a day. He dug into the chain architecture, the token supply, the inflation model, the governance structure, the actual on-chain usage, not the marketing version. That's why this teardown exists. So if you're here because you requested it, welcome. If you're here because you've been curious, buckle up. Let's lift it, lock it, lights on. Before we talk about what this thing does or how it feels, we need to talk about who built it. Because in this garage, we don't fall in love with promises. We trust the people holding the wrenches. XPR didn't come out of a Discord DAO. It didn't come out of an anonymous dev team. And it didn't come out of a bull market pitch deck. It came out of a real US fintech company called Metallicus. That matters because it tells you immediately what kind of project this is. This wasn't built by crypto maximalists trying to tear the system down. It was built by operators trying to make crypto work inside the real financial world. At the center of it is Marshall Hayner. Marshall isn't a hype founder. He's been in crypto since the early Bitcoin days, founder of QuickCoin, Block.io, and later MetalPay, one of the first serious attempts to make crypto usable for normal people. And that background shows, because if you've ever tried to onboard a non-crypto user, you already know the truth. Crypto doesn't fail because it's slow. Crypto fails because it's confusing. Marshall's entire career points at one obsession: removing friction between banks, users, and blockchain rails. That's not a flashy problem, but it's a real one. Alongside him is Fred Krueger. Fred isn't a crypto-only builder either. He's a serial tech entrepreneur with multiple exits in traditional software. The kind of guy who understands scale, compliance, and what happens after a product launches. He's not here to ship a token and disappear. He's here to build something that survives contact with the real world. Then there's Glenn Marion, the technical backbone. This is someone who's been deep in wallet infrastructure and transaction systems long before it was fashionable, including early Dogecoin wallet work back when most people thought crypto was a joke. Translation: this team understands wallets, identity, and money flow, not just white papers and theory. Funding tells the same story. No massive VC token sale, no cliff unlocks hanging over holders, no pressure to pump narratives for exit liquidity. Most funding came internally, through Metallicus itself. That cuts both ways. On the upside, no VC overhang, no forced timelines. On the downside, more centralized control and more responsibility on one company to execute. That's the train. Early supporters included names like Eric Voorhees and Brian Kelly, which tells you this wasn't ignored by serious people, even if it never became a Twitter darling. So here's the honest takeaway on the pit crew. This is not a meme team. This is not a maximalist team. This is not a hype cycle team. This is a fintech-first, compliance-aware, UX-driven crew trying to do something most of crypto avoids: make blockchain boring enough that normal people will actually use it. And once you understand that, the next question comes naturally. What did they actually choose to build? And why does this need to exist at all? Because on the surface, it's easy to say, okay, it's a layer 1. Ethereum already exists. Ethereum has names. Solana is fast. So why bother? That's the wrong comparison. Ethereum was never designed to be simple. Solana was never designed to be boring. XPR was. XPR is its own blockchain, its own engine, its own transmission, its own road. It's not riding Ethereum. It's not a layer 2. It's not borrowing block space from anyone else. Under the hood, it's built on EOS.io, also known as Antelope, a stack designed for fast block times, quick finality, and predictable performance. For the coder, that means the network behaves the same under load as it does when it's quiet. For the carpenter, it means the engine starts the same way every time you turn the key. Transactions finalize in about a second. Once they're done, they're done. Now here's the design choice that changes everything. On XPR, users don't pay gas fees for normal actions. Ethereum charges a toll every time you touch the road. XPR pays for the road in the background. Block producers are compensated through the protocol instead of shaking down users at every intersection. That single choice changes the entire experience. And you feel it immediately. Most chains assume copying long wallet addresses doesn't stress you out. They assume you're fine, knowing one wrong click can send money into the void forever. That's fine for crypto natives. That's not how normal people use money. XPR looked at that entire experience and said, what if we build this like a daily driver instead? So the design philosophy flips. Instead of optimizing for theoretical purity or hype velocity, XPR optimizes for usability, predictability, and simplicity. On most chains, sending money feels like defusing a bomb. On XPR, you don't do that. You just send it to @JohnDoe. That's it. No address anxiety, no clipboard gymnastics, no did I paste the right thing? It feels like sending an email or Venmo. And that sounds small, until you remember how many people have lost money because one character was wrong. That's not a gimmick. That's basic usability. Then there are fees, or more accurately, the lack of them. No guessing games, no timing the network, no surprise spikes. Transactions just go through. Then there's identity. On XPR, identity is optional, not forced, but available. Why does that matter? Because banks, payroll, and businesses don't live in an anonymous fantasy world. XPR isn't pretending regulation doesn't exist. It's acknowledging reality. And when you strip it all the way down, here's what XPR actually is. Not a revolution chain, not a meme chain, not a DeFi casino. It's an attempt to build crypto rails that feel invisible. The kind where users don't think about networks. They don't think about fees. They don't think about confirmations. They just send money to @John Doe, and it works. And that's why people judge it unfairly. They're judging a sedan like it's supposed to be a race car. Which brings us to the next question we have to answer honestly. If this thing is designed to be simple, compliant, and user-friendly, who is actually using it right now? Now we get to the part that actually matters. Not what it claims to do, not how clean the UI feels, not how elegant the architecture is. Who's using it? Because a car that never leaves the garage is still just a concept. Here's the honest answer. XPR is being used, but not by the crowd crypto Twitter expects. This is not a chain full of degens slamming leverage at 3 in the morning. This is not a meme factory. This is not a yield casino. Usage on XPR lives primarily inside its own ecosystem. That includes wallets like WebAuth, payment rails connected to MetalPay, and applications where the user never has to think about gas, networks, or confirmations. And that's the point. People using XPR are tweeting about it. They're not posting screenshots of transactions. They're not flexing APYs. They're just moving money. That's why adoption numbers look quiet, because XPR isn't optimized for spectacle. It's optimized for invisibility. Now let's be very clear. This is early stage adoption. You are not seeing millions of daily active users. You are not seeing global penetration. You are not seeing XPR dominate dashboards. And pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But what you are seeing is something different. You're seeing usage that isn't driven by incentives. You're seeing flows that aren't wash-traded. You're seeing people interact because the experience doesn't fight them. That matters, because when adoption eventually shows up, it doesn't look like hype first. It looks like quiet utility. And that leads us to the uncomfortable truth. Right now, XPR is stuck at step 1. Internal usage exists. External awareness does not. And step 2, breaking out of its own ecosystem, is where most projects fail. Because at that point, XPR isn't competing with blockchains anymore. It's competing with Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, banks, and habits people already trust. That's not a crypto problem, that's a distribution problem. Which brings us to the real risk section. Now we get to the part that actually matters. Not what it claims to do, not how clean the UI feels, not how elegant the architecture is, who's using it. Because a car that never leaves the garage is still just the concept. Here's the honest answer. XPR is being used, but not by the crowd crypto Twitter expects. This is not a chain full of degens slamming leverage at 3 in the morning. This is not a meme factory. This is not a yield casino. Usage on XPR lives primarily inside its own ecosystem. That includes wallets like WebAuth, payment rails connected to MetalPay, and applications where the user never has to think about gas, networks, or confirmations. And that's the point. People using XPR aren't tweeting about it. They're not posting screenshots of transactions. They're not flexing APYs. They're just moving money. That's why adoption numbers look quiet. Because XPR isn't optimized for spectacle, it's optimized for invisibility. Now let's be very clear. This is early stage adoption. You are not seeing millions of daily active users. You are not seeing global penetration. You are not seeing XPR dominate dashboards. And pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But what you are seeing is something different. You're seeing usage that isn't driven by incentives. You're seeing flows that aren't wash-traded. You're seeing people interact because the experience doesn't fight them. That matters. Because when adoption eventually shows up, it doesn't look like hype first. It looks like quiet utility. And that leads us to the uncomfortable truth. Right now, XPR is stuck at step 1. Internal usage exists. External awareness does not. And step 2, breaking out of its own ecosystem, is where most projects fail. Because at that point, XPR isn't competing with blockchains anymore. It's competing with Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, banks, and habits people already trust. That's not a crypto problem. That's a distribution problem, which brings us to the real risk section. Because when a project isn't failing on tech and it isn't failing on UX, the next place you have to look is the fuel system. And this is where a lot of people get tripped up because they hear tokenomics and think it's some abstract crypto buzzword. It's not. Tokenomics is just asking a simple question. What actually keeps this thing running? The token here is XPR. And XPR isn't a meme, it isn't a collectible, and it isn't designed to magically go up just because time passes. XPR is the fuel. It's what pays the operators who keep the network alive. It's what underwrites bandwidth, computation, and storage behind the scenes. And it's what gives holders influence over who runs the chain. Because users don't pay gas fees every time they move money, the network still has to be paid somehow. That cost doesn't disappear. It gets spread across the system. Instead of charging users at the pump, XPR pays for the road in the background. That's why there's no hard cap. XPR does not have a fixed maximum supply like Bitcoin. New tokens are issued every year to compensate block producers and secure the network. For the coder, that's sustainable protocol design. For the carpenter, that's dilution. There isn't a giant VC unlock bomb waiting to go off. There's no single date where everything floods the market, but supply does increase steadily over time. And that leads to the most important reality check in this entire teardown. XPR does not automatically become more valuable just because the tech works. Value only shows up if usage grows faster than supply. If more people move money on the network, if more real activity flows through it, inflation fades into the background. If that usage doesn't show up, inflation quietly caps upside. That doesn't kill the chain. It doesn't mean the project failed. But it absolutely shapes price behavior. And this is where the risk becomes real, because XPR is not competing on hype. It's competing on invisibility. That means adoption has to come from distribution, not speculation. Wallets people already use. Payment apps people already trust. Systems where crypto doesn't feel like crypto at all. If XPR breaks out of its own ecosystem, the tokenomics suddenly makes sense. If it doesn't, the network can keep running smoothly, while the market shrugs. And that's the trade you're making here. So now we've earned the next conversation. Not about promises. Not about vision, but about what that reality is worth. Now we can talk about the money and the scenarios that actually matter. Before we put numbers on this, credit where it's due. This entire section is powered by Lulu, our in-house queen of technical analysis. She's the one digging through charts, market structure, supply curves, and dominance math, so you and I don't have to stare at candles all night. She doesn't chase vibes. She doesn't chase narratives. She chases structure. So what you're about to hear isn't hopium, it's how Lulu sees the board. All right, now let's talk about the money. Not promises, not guarantees, just scenarios. Because price isn't magic. Price is market share, adoption, and timing. So let's anchor ourselves in reality first. Right now, the total crypto market is sitting around $3.05 trillion, and XPR is trading at roughly 0.0027 Bitcoin, which puts its market cap in the neighborhood of $70 to $80 million. That makes XPR a rounding error in the global crypto market. And that immediately tells you something important. XPR doesn't need to take over crypto to move. It just needs to matter a little more than it does today. So let's walk through the lanes. First scenario, cruise control. Nothing dramatic happens. No breakout narrative. No major integrations. Crypto as a whole grows, but XPR keeps roughly the same slice of the market it has today. In that world, XPR simply moves with the tide. Starting from about 0.0027 today, that scenario points to XPR trading between half a cent and a penny, roughly 0.004 up to 1 cent during strong market conditions. Alive, functional, but forgettable. That's the engine runs, but nobody's talking about it outcome. Second scenario, traction. This is where Lulu starts leaning forward. Crypto grows maybe to $4 or $5 trillion, and XPR doesn't become a superstar, but it becomes recognized. Payments narrative, consumer UX narrative, invisible rails narrative, not hype, usage. If XPR captures even 0.1% of a $5 trillion crypto market, that translates to roughly $5 billion in market value. When you spread that across the current supply, that puts XPR somewhere in the mid-teens to around 20 cents per coin. That's not moon math, that's infrastructure math. That's XPR being reclassified from forgotten small cap to legitimate payment rail. Third scenario, true breakout. This is the one people love to talk about and usually misunderstand. In this world, crypto pushes toward $10 trillion. And XPR doesn't just gain traction, it becomes default plumbing somewhere that actually matters. Not everywhere, not dominant, just embedded. If XPR captures even half of 1% of that environment, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars in market cap. At that level, XPR would be trading north of $1 per coin, potentially in the $1 to $2 range, depending on circulating supply at the time. That's not a slow grind. That's a repricing. That's when XPR stops trading like an altcoin and starts trading like infrastructure. That's the moon scenario. Rare, hard, but not impossible. Now we have to talk about the black swan, because this is where the asymmetry really lives. The positive black swan is simple. A real fintech company, bank, or consumer payments platform decides it doesn't want to build blockchain rails from scratch. They don't want Ethereum's gas unpredictability. They don't want Solana's complexity. They don't want users asking questions. They want something that already works. Names instead of addresses. Instant finality. No gas decisions. Optional identity. Compliance ready. If XPR gets quietly integrated under the hood by a real payments player, price doesn't creep up slowly from 0.0027. It moves fast. Not because retail shows up, because usage shows up. That's the upside black swan. Now, the downside black swan. XPR leans into compliance instead of running from it. That's a strength until regulation shifts, a partner pulls out, or a key on-ramp disappears. When infrastructure loses trust, it doesn't bleed slowly. It gaps. Add supply concentration and an inflationary model, and downside can arrive faster than logic, potentially pushing price back towards sub-penny levels, even if the tech itself still works. That's the risk. So when you put all of this together, here's Lulu's bottom line, and it's clean. XPR at 0.0027 is not a momentum bet. It's not a hype bet. It's a classification bet. Either it stays small and ignored, or it wakes up one cycle in a completely different weight class. There is no middle ground. And that's why this asset is asymmetric. Not because it's loud, but because it's quiet. And quiet things don't move until they do. Just so we're crystal clear before we close this thing out, None of this is financial advice. We showed you scenarios. We showed you math. We showed you structure. And yes, we told you upfront, our technical analysis specialist Lulu prepared the numbers for us. She's very good at what she does. She reads charts all day. She spots things most people miss. But let's also be very clear about something else. Lulu is a pig. Not metaphorically, not as an insult. She has hooves, she has a tail, and she has a very specific kind of snout for sniffing out support, resistance, and bad breakouts. So no, we're not fat shaming. We're just stating biological facts, which means if you're the guy taking financial advice from a pig without doing your own research, that one's on you. All right, with that out of the way, let's put a number on this thing. Here's the Dyno Score. On technology, XPR comes in at a 7 out of 10. It's fast enough, consistent, and predictable. Not bleeding edge, not experimental, but it does exactly what it says it does. On usability, this is where XPR shines, an 8.5 out of 10. Names instead of addresses, no gas decisions, simple transfers. For normal humans, this is one of the cleanest experiences in crypto, and that matters more than people like to admit. On adoption, the score drops. Right now, XPR gets a 5 out of 10. The tech works, the UX is there, but the crowd hasn't shown up yet. Until it does, this remains a promise, not a finished story. On token design and economics, Lulu gives it a 5.5 out of 10. Inflation exists. Supply concentration exists. Neither is fatal, but both cap upside unless usage grows faster than issuance. On asymmetry, though, this is where XPR earns its keep, an 8 out of 10. Because this thing doesn't need to dominate crypto to matter. It just needs to get embedded somewhere real. That's the bet. So when you average it all out, the garage Dyno score for XPR lands at a 6.8 out of 10. That puts it squarely in this category. Looks boring in the showroom, but could surprise you if the road actually gets built. Not a hype monster. Not a dead project. A quiet infrastructure play with a very specific audience. And that's the honest verdict. If you're looking for fireworks and instant gratification, this probably isn't your ride. If you're looking at a future where crypto stops being a hobby and starts being plumbing, you at least need to know this thing exists. If you've got a project you want on the lift, leave it in the comments. Let it rip.